Mistress attacks a pregnant wife in a hospital. Then, her billionaire father's revenge shocks the whole city. She waited alone in the hospital hallway, one hand on her swollen belly, the other gripping a phone with no reply. He promised he'd never miss another appointment, but he didn't come. But instead of him was his mistress. The elevator opened. Perfume, high heels, a smile pretending to be gentle. A woman stepped forward with the kind of confidence that comes from cruelty. "So, this is where you hide?" she said softly, every word wrapped in poison. "Please," the pregnant woman whispered, "not here." But jealousy never listens to reason. A scream shattered the quiet as a silver bracelet spun across the floor, blood on its edge. Outside, rain began to fall harder. Inside, a heartbeat faltered. Within hours, headlines would name the scandal. And somewhere above that storm, a powerful man was already preparing to remind the world what happens when someone hurts his daughter. The sound of sirens faded hours ago, but the silence they left behind was louder. In the same hallway where chaos had erupted, calm now felt unnatural. She sat alone once more, the smell of rain and disinfectant still clinging to the air. She had grown used to waiting. His absences no longer surprised her. His excuses always arrived like clockwork. Time inside the hospital moved slower, each second stretching like a question with no answer. She scrolled through her phone until her thumb stopped at an image, a tiny hand floating in grainy gray. "You're my reason, baby," she whispered, the words trembling between fear and hope. Her smile was small, her reflection tired, as if it had forgotten what happiness looked like. Outside, rain blurred the parking lot lights, every drop a reminder that promises dissolve too easily. Across the room, a nurse called a name that wasn't hers. She adjusted her coat, closed her eyes, and waited for footsteps that never came. And somewhere deep inside, she already knew the world she loved had just shifted forever. Perfume reached the air first, sweet, sharp, unmistakable. Marissa Vale entered the waiting room as if she owned the silence. Her heels clicked against the tile, confident, deliberate. Every conversation thinned into whispers. Elena's heart recognized the sound before her eyes did. She turned, voice low, trembling. "Please, not here." Marissa's smile curved like a blade. "Why not? Everyone deserves to see what a lie looks like." The words floated across the room, soft enough for gossip, loud enough to wound. Elena looked away, trying to keep her voice steady. "This isn't the place." But the line had already been crossed. Two women, once strangers, now bound by betrayal, stood beneath the same unforgiving light. Outside, thunder rolled across Seattle's skyline. Every story has a moment where silence breaks. This was theirs. And somewhere beyond the glass, the city waited for its first rumor. Tension thickened like fog. Marissa's voice rose, low but pointed. "Do you really think he chose you?" Elena's breath caught. "He's my husband." Marissa laughed, brittle. "He was, until he met me." The air between them seemed to vibrate. A nurse glanced over, uncertain whether to intervene. Elena stood, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. "This isn't you, Marissa. Please stop." Marissa shook her head, eyes glassy with anger she couldn't disguise. "I'm done hiding in the dark." The sentence echoed louder than she meant. People turned. The hum of machines faltered. Something fragile slipped between control and chaos. A sudden noise, a gasp, then confusion. Nurses called for help. Someone knocked over a chair. Elena's vision blurred under the white hospital light, voices overlapping like waves. In the space of a breath, calm turned into crisis, and what began as words would soon become headlines. Alarms cut through the corridor. Nurses hurried, pushing carts, calling names. No one understood what had happened, only that something had gone terribly wrong. Elena's world folded into sound. Beeping monitors, rushing footsteps, the metallic scent of fear. Hands reached for her, guiding her toward safety, voices urging her to breathe. Through the commotion, Marissa stood near the doorway, pale, frozen, the mask of confidence slipping away. A bracelet slid from her wrist, clattering onto the tile. The initials M glimmered beneath the harsh light before rolling under a chair. Security arrived moments later, clearing the crowd. Marissa vanished into the rain outside, leaving only the echo of perfume and panic. Inside, the waiting room fell silent again. Somewhere down the hall, machines kept rhythm with a single fragile heartbeat. Seattle's storm had begun, and nothing about the Whitmore name would ever mean peace again. At Westward Industries, the boardroom smelled of steel and rain. Richard Whitmore sat at the head of the table, eyes on the skyline. Numbers flickered on the screen. Deals worth millions hung in the air. Then his phone buzzed once. He read the message, and the world beneath him stilled. "Your daughter's in the hospital." The pen in his hand stopped mid-signature. For a moment, no one breathed. A vice president began to speak, but Richard lifted a single hand. "Get the car," he said quietly. That was all. The meeting ended without another word. As he walked out, the younger executives watched in silence. They had seen him dismantle entire companies without emotion. But this was different. Outside, thunder rolled over Seattle. Money could move markets, but it couldn't buy time. And Richard Whitmore had just realized time might be the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. The black Mercedes cut through the storm. Rain streaked the windows like tears the sky refused to hide. Inside, Richard sat in silence, his phone glowing in his hand. Condition: critical. He read it twice, as if the words might change if he stared long enough. Across from him, his assistant, Daniel Graves, whispered, "Sir, should I call ahead?" Richard shook his head slowly. "For 30 years, I built empires," he murmured. "Now, I just want to save one life." The car sped past the city lights, every red signal reflecting off his tired face. He thought of Elena as a child, running barefoot through the estate garden, calling him her hero. He had missed her last birthday. He had missed too much. Now the thought of losing her was a weight he couldn't bear. "Drive faster," he said, voice breaking for the first time in years. The rain answered with thunder. The hospital corridors glowed with harsh white light. Richard's shoes echoed softly as he walked toward the ICU. Through the window he saw his daughter lying still, surrounded by machines that hummed like distant waves. A nurse whispered updates, but her voice dissolved into background noise. All Richard could hear was the faint rhythm of a monitor, steady, fragile, alive. He placed a trembling hand against the glass. "I failed you once," he whispered. "Not again." The words fogged the window, fading almost instantly, but the promise stayed. Behind him, Daniel stood silently, head bowed. Years of power and control meant nothing now. The empire Richard had built outside these walls couldn't touch the silence in this room. He closed his eyes, the faint beeping syncing with his heartbeat. It was the sound of life, and it reminded him why the storm inside him was only beginning. Daniel returned moments later, a silver object glinting in his palm. "We found this in the waiting room," he said. Richard turned. "What is it?" "A bracelet, sir. Initials MV." The letters caught the light like a whisper of guilt. Richard's jaw tightened. "Find her," he said, "and find Ethan." Daniel nodded, already making calls. There was no rage in Richard's voice, only precision, like a blade being sharpened. He looked back at the ICU window, at his daughter's pale reflection beside his own. "She wanted peace," he murmured. "Now I'll give her justice." The rain outside began again, harder, faster, matching the rhythm of purpose. For the first time in years, the titan of Westward Industries wasn't thinking about profit or press. He was thinking about debt, the kind no amount of money could erase. Across town, Ethan Vale stood in a glass tower, laughter echoing through the boardroom. Investors toasted another record quarter. Champagne sparkled under fluorescent light. His phone buzzed on the table. Once, then twice. The hospital's name flashed across the screen. He glanced at it, hesitated, and turned it face down. "Let's keep going," he said, smiling. No one noticed the tremor in his voice. Minutes passed, and the laughter grew louder, emptier. The city outside gleamed with cold perfection, mirroring the man inside it. While a life waited in silence across town, Ethan chose comfort over conscience. He didn't see the storm racing toward him, carried by the man who had just whispered, "Find him." And when the thunder reached his glass walls, it would already be too late. 2 hours later, Ethan arrived at St. Helena Memorial. He adjusted his tie as if that could fix everything. Richard stood in the hallway, motionless, the hum of machines filling the space between them. When their eyes met, silence hit harder than any word. "You heard 2 hours ago," Richard said. His tone was low, steady, lethal. Ethan's throat tightened. "It was an accident," he stammered. Richard took one step forward. "Accidents don't come with initials engraved in silver." The color drained from Ethan's face. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Behind them, nurses passed quietly, pretending not to hear. Richard's voice softened, but only slightly. "You built your life on lies, Ethan, and now you'll watch it crumble." Ethan looked toward the glass wall of the ICU where Elena lay still. "She needs me," he whispered. "No," Richard replied. "She needed you before this." For a moment, both men stood frozen, one broken by guilt, the other fueled by resolve. Then Richard turned away, ending the conversation with the finality of a gavel. He left Ethan standing in silence and walked toward the security office. In the dim light of the security room, the footage flickered to life. Grainy black and white frames. The waiting room. 2 figures, tense words, a movement, then chaos. No sound, but the truth was loud enough. Daniel paused the video, glancing toward Richard. "Sir?" Richard's expression didn't change. "Copy this," he said. "One for me, one for the police." Daniel hesitated. "Should I alert the press?" Richard shook his head. "Not yet. Justice isn't a show." He leaned closer to the screen, his reflection merging with the frozen image. In that still frame, power met pain. The empire he had built on control was now powerless before a single act of cruelty. He exhaled slowly, the sound almost a growl. "This will never happen to her again," he murmured. Outside, rain tapped against the windows like a metronome, marking his vow. The file was saved, sealed, and sent. And somewhere in the city, the first spark of consequence began to spread. Soft light filtered through the blinds. The steady beep of a monitor kept rhythm with life itself. Elena stirred, her lashes fluttering like someone returning from a long, dark dream. A nurse appeared beside her, voice gentle. "You're safe now." Elena's lips parted. "My baby?" The nurse smiled faintly. "Still fighting, strong as ever." A tear slipped down Elena's cheek before she could stop it. Relief came not as joy, but as trembling. Every muscle ached, but the sound of that heartbeat, steady, fragile, was enough. Through the window she saw movement. Her father stood outside, motionless, his hand resting on the glass. He didn't speak, and he didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. For the first time in days, she closed her eyes not from fear, but from gratitude. The world outside could wait. For now, there was only breath and life and hope returning one beat at a time. That evening, the room was dim except for the soft glow of monitors. Richard sat beside Elena's bed, his face drawn with exhaustion and quiet anger. She turned her head slightly. "Dad?" "I'm here," he said. Her voice was weak but clear. "They told me what happened. Please tell me you won't start another war." Richard looked down, his jaw tightening. "This isn't revenge," he said. "It's justice." She reached for his hand. "Just promise me it ends here." He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, heavy with everything unspoken. Finally, he said softly, "When a man threatens what you love, peace stops being an option." Elena's eyes filled again. "Then fight for peace, not power." Richard nodded, but his gaze drifted toward the window, where storm clouds gathered over the city. He didn't need to say it aloud. Some storms can't be stopped once they start. By morning, the story had spread. "A pregnant socialite attacked," the headlines whispered. faceless but unmistakable. The city buzzed with speculation. Screens glowed. Reporters crowded hospital gates. Inside his office, Richard read the alerts in silence. Daniel rushed in. "Sir, the leak came from an anonymous account. People are connecting it to Elena." Richard's expression hardened. "Bury the story," he said. "No one decides when the truth speaks except me." "Understood." Phones rang non-stop. Journalists demanded statements, but Westward's PR lines went dead by design. Richard stood by the window, watching the chaos unfold below like a chessboard. "Every rumor has a cost," he said quietly. "Let them pay first." Daniel nodded, already making calls to lock down every source. In the city that thrived on scandal, power was once again shifting. And this time it belonged to a father who had learned that silence could be a weapon too. Richard Whitmore leaned over the edge of his desk, voice low but sharp. "Trace her accounts, every penny." Daniel Graves nodded, already pulling data on his tablet. "She's connected to Ethan's company," he said. "Money moved from Crossvale Holdings into her PR firm last month." Richard's jaw set. "Then let's pull the plug." Daniel hesitated. "That could ruin him completely." "That's the idea," Richard replied. Outside, the skyline glimmered in the rain. He had spent decades building systems that protected his empire. Now, every connection, every account, every secret would turn into a weapon. This wasn't anger anymore. It was calculation. For every headline that mocked his daughter, he would answer with evidence. For every whisper of scandal, he would respond with truth. "Find me everything," he said quietly. "And Daniel, no mistakes." The assistant nodded. By midnight, the search had begun, and the digital war Richard launched would soon devour every name tied to betrayal. In her downtown loft, Marissa Vale scrolled through endless news feeds. Her reflection shimmered on the black screen, confident, defiant. "He won't dare touch me," she said to herself. She had survived every rumor before. Men like Richard Whitmore didn't get their hands dirty, or so she believed. But the phone kept buzzing, each alert colder than the last. Contracts suspended, sponsors backing out, clients reevaluating partnerships. She poured herself a drink, ignoring the growing noise outside. Then came a flash, white, blinding, unexpected. The paparazzi had found her. Cameras burst through the rain like lightning. Her smile faltered. Behind the glass, she saw her own image framed by chaos. Perfect hair, shaking hands, eyes wide with disbelief. She pulled the curtains shut, breathing hard. For the first time, the city she used to command now watched her like prey. And in that silence, she whispered the words she had never meant to say aloud. "What if he's not bluffing?" 2 weeks later, the Whitmore Foundation Charity Gala filled the Grand Hall. Every chandelier glowed, every camera waited. The city's elite gathered for what they believed was another night of champagne and charity. On stage, Richard stood behind the podium, face unreadable. "Tonight," he began, "silence ends." The lights dimmed. Behind him, the giant screen flickered to life. What appeared next wasn't a scene of violence. It was truth rendered as evidence. Timestamps, footage, reports, a trail of lies turned visible. Gasps rippled through the room as faces recognized what they saw. A story, once whispered, now stood exposed under the golden light. Richard's voice carried steady over the murmurs. "This is what power without conscience looks like. Tonight, we reclaim what it broke. Our name, our peace, our dignity." Phones lifted, recording every word. In that moment, justice became public, and the city finally saw who had tried to bury it. Across the ballroom, heads turned toward the woman in the gold dress. Marissa froze under the spotlight's harsh glare. Dozens of cameras pointed at her, lenses unblinking. "It's fake!" she shouted, voice cracking. But no one believed her. Daniel stepped forward, holding a folder. "Verified by the police," he said calmly. Reporters swarmed, microphones flashing. Every denial she uttered echoed back like a confession. Her hands trembled as her phone buzzed again, Another sponsor gone, another door closing. The empire she had built on charm was dissolving before her eyes. Richard stood silently, watching not with glee, but finality. Marissa turned, desperate for escape, but the crowd parted like judgment itself. Her reflection in the mirrored wall showed what she refused to see: power stripped bare. And as she pushed through the reporters, the applause began, not for her, but for the truth that finally spoke her name. The noise faded. Only one voice rose above the crowd. Elena stepped forward, pale but steady, her presence enough to silence the room. She looked at Marissa, then at the audience. "You said I was weak," she said softly. "You were wrong." The words were simple, but they struck harder than any speech. For a heartbeat, the hall was silent. Then applause erupted, first scattered, then thunderous. Reporters captured the moment, cameras flashing like a storm of light. Elena didn't smile. She simply stood tall, her hand resting over her heart. For months, she had been a headline, a victim, a rumor. Now she was something else, proof that grace could stand where cruelty tried to win. Richard watched her from the edge of the stage, pride softening the lines on his face. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man defending a legacy. He felt like a father witnessing redemption. By morning, the nation had chosen a side. Every major outlet carried the same headline: Whitmore Gala exposes Mistress scandal. Clips from the event flooded social media. Commentators replayed Richard's words, debating whether it was vengeance or justice. In her apartment, Marissa sat on the floor, surrounded by unopened messages and flashing calls. Every notification was another brand cutting ties. Her name, once luxury, now trended beside the word disgrace. Across town, Ethan watched the same coverage from his penthouse. His reflection in the glass looked older, defeated. He muted the TV, but the captions kept scrolling. Crossvale shares plummet. A lifetime built on appearances was collapsing in real time. The empire of charm, secrets, and silence had burned overnight. Seattle's skyline glowed cold outside his window, and for the first time, Ethan realized power meant nothing when truth refused to look away. The city had chosen its memory, and it would not forget. That night, Marissa went live. Tears streaked her makeup as she looked into the camera. "They framed me," she cried. "They turned everyone against me." Thousands watched, some sympathetic, most not. In his office, Richard observed the stream in silence. Daniel hovered nearby, holding a small device. "She's twisting the story," he said. Richard's voice was calm. "Then we release the audio." Moments later, a verified post appeared on every major feed. Exclusive. Marissa Vale, recorded in private call. The clip played, her own voice clear and certain. "I did it. She took everything from me, I just wanted her gone." No violence, just venom. The tone alone told the story. Within minutes, hashtags shifted from pity to outrage. Sponsors vanished. Public opinion turned cold. Marissa's screen filled with comments that no apology could erase. Some truths destroy in silence. Others roar through wires. Richard leaned back, whispering, "Justice speaks louder than lies." And somewhere across the city, another secret began to unravel. The crash came fast. Investors pulled out. Partners demanded distance. By noon, Crossvale Holdings had lost half its value. Ethan stood at the window of his office, tie loosened, phone silent. For years, he had been the man who never blinked, who always landed on his feet. Now, every reflection around him looked like judgment. He scrolled through headlines: CEO linked to scandal, corporate collapse, inevitable. The numbers on his screen bled red. He sank into the leather chair that had once made him feel untouchable. On his desk lay the last message from Marissa. "You promised you'd protect me." He whispered into the emptiness, "I lost everything, for her." But the city didn't answer. Only the echo of his own words filled the glass room he once ruled. Money, power, reputation, all gone, leaving only the truth he'd traded for desire, And truth, unlike fortune, never forgets its debtors. In her hospital room, Elena watched the news quietly. The headlines were everywhere, her name, her father's, the downfall that followed. Tears welled, not from triumph but release. "It's not victory," she whispered. "It's peace." Daniel knocked gently before entering. "Your father did what any father would do," he said. She smiled faintly. "Sometimes his love feels like vengeance." He hesitated. "He calls it protection." The sunlight cut through the blinds, warm against the sterile white walls. Elena turned toward it, voice soft. "Maybe peace and justice can't live in the same room." Daniel said nothing. He had seen the cost of both. On the TV, a commentator spoke of redemption and legacy, but Elena wasn't listening anymore. Her hand rested on her heart, feeling life steady beneath her palm. Outside, sirens wailed faintly, a reminder that even peace in this city never lasted long. Midnight. Marissa typed furiously, eyes red, mind racing. She uploaded files marked Whitmore leaks to anonymous servers, claiming manipulation and corruption. Within hours, bloggers began sharing fragments, half-truths dressed as proof. At Westward Tower, Daniel burst into Richard's office. "She's trying to flip the story. Fake documents, false transactions." Richard didn't flinch. "Cut her off," he said coldly. "Every dollar, every contact." Daniel nodded, already dialing. Within minutes, accounts were frozen, contracts terminated, access denied. Marissa's last messages bounced back, unread. For someone who had lived through fame, silence was the cruelest punishment. Richard watched the storm unfold on multiple screens, his reflection layered over the chaos. "She wanted power," he said quietly. "Now she'll learn what it costs." Outside, the rain returned, drumming against the glass like an old warning. The final battle had begun, not for money, but for truth that refused to die. By dawn, the digital battlefield had changed sides. Richard's team moved fast. Bank statements, transaction trails, and verified reports filled the web. The truth was no longer rumor. It was evidence. Screens across America lit up with headlines. Whitmore releases proof, the real story. Public opinion shifted overnight. What once looked like power now appeared as deceit. In interviews, commentators called him the Iron Father, not because he was ruthless, but because he refused to bend when his family needed him most. Richard didn't celebrate. He simply stood at the window of Westward Tower, watching light return to the skyline. For years he had chased profit. Now he understood legacy. "Money builds walls," he murmured, "but truth builds foundations." Daniel entered quietly. "Sir, the world's on your side again." Richard nodded once. "Good. Let's use it for something that lasts." And as morning broke, the empire that once traded in wealth began to deal in redemption instead. Weeks later, Elena walked into a press room filled with cameras. Behind her, the banner read, "Whitmore Foundation for Maternal Safety." The crowd rose to its feet. She smiled, not with pride but with purpose. "For a long time, I thought pain meant defeat," she began. "But pain only wins when we stop fighting." Applause spread through the room like light through glass. Journalists captured every word, calling her from victim to voice. Beside the podium, Richard stood silently, letting her take the spotlight. He had built fortunes, but this was his daughter's victory. After the event, Elena turned to him. "You taught me to protect what matters," she said. Richard replied, "You taught me what it truly means to matter." That night, social media overflowed with her speech. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And for the first time, the Whitmore name no longer stood for power, it stood for compassion. Winter passed into spring. Inside a quiet hospital room, Elena cradled her newborn son. His name was Noah Alexander Whitmore. Tiny fingers curled around hers as sunlight painted the walls in gold. Richard entered softly, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked at his grandson, then at his daughter. "He'll grow knowing the truth," he said. Elena smiled, and the strength behind it. He reached out, taking the baby in his arms. For a man who once commanded cities, the weight of a child felt heavier than any crown. On the table beside them lay papers for the Foundation's first national program, safety funding for hospitals across the country. Richard traced the logo with his thumb. This is what legacy should feel like. Elena nodded. Not revenge, renewal. Outside, dawn stretched over Seattle, washing away the last of the storm. In that fragile light, the Whitmore family finally began to heal. A month later, peace was interrupted by a single envelope. No sender. Only Elena's name written in dark ink. Inside, a photograph. Marissa in a prison uniform, eyes cold, a faint smile on her lips. On the back, a line scrawled by hand. There's still one secret left. Elena's breath caught. She held Noah closer, feeling his heartbeat against her chest. Richard entered moments later, reading the note without surprise. "It ends when we stop letting fear write our story," he said. Elena nodded, though her hands still trembled. She looked out of the window toward the skyline that had witnessed their pain and their rebirth. Every city has shadows, she thought, but not every shadow deserves to win. She placed the note in a drawer, locked it, and whispered to her son, "Your story begins with courage, not fear." Outside, thunder rolled softly, like a reminder that even peace carries echoes. Elena Whitmore stood before the gathered crowd, her posture calm, her voice clear. "Money can build empires," she said, "but only love rebuilds people." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then she continued, her words steady, unhurried. "I learned that power means nothing when it can't protect the ones we love. And pain, no matter how deep, can become strength when we choose not to let it define us." She looked across the room, her gaze warm but firm. "There was a time I thought justice was about winning. Now I know it's about healing." The audience listened in quiet understanding. She paused, drawing a breath. "If this story has reminded you that compassion still matters, that truth is worth defending even when it costs us everything, then share it. Let it remind someone else that no loss is final when love survives." Her final words lingered in the air. Empires fade, headlines vanish, but kindness, once spoken, has no end. And with that, her story closed not in triumph, but in peace. The world she once feared now carried her voice, and through it, the legacy of every heart that chose hope over hate. If her journey touched you, stay with us. Subscribe, keep your heart open, and turn on the light for the next story, because love always deserves to be heard.